Hey guys, this is EckhartsLadder. Hello and welcome to another video. Before we begin, I will be doing another Sea of Thieves stream tonight over on my gaming channel, X2. It will be featuring Corey and Charlie, who many of you know. If you're interested, I'll put a link to the channel down in the description, and if you can, while you're there, drop a subscription. I'd love to get us to 100k by the end of the year, although that is a bit of a pipe dream. So today we'll be talking about starfighters, and in particular, one very famous starfighter, the X-Wing. And many of you guys have asked me, why didn't the Empire just use the X-Wing? It seems to be objectively the much better starfighter, and the Empire is huge with lots of money, so why didn't they just start incorporating X-Wings into their fleet? And the obvious reason is that the good guys and the bad guys each need to have a distinctive ship, but let's also look at things from an in-universe perspective. And there are really two main reasons why the Empire steered clear away from the X-Wing. The first relates to production, and the second to doctrine, with the second having many sort of sub-ideas that we'll discuss later. So let's talk galactic history and first look at production. As Palpatine declared a new order, the Republic Navy, in becoming the Imperial Navy, underwent a massive transformation. Transformations not only in unit type, but also scale. One thing that people really forget is that before the Clone Wars, the Republic did not have a standing military. Sure, there were shipyards and there were some very small defensive forces, but generally planets were responsible for protecting themselves. Then the Clone Wars started, with ships sort of appearing out of thin air. However, with the war ended and the Empire now taking on a much more active role in not only defending their territory but also suppressing member systems, we see the needed size of the Navy balloon without necessarily the support systems in place to sustain it. So a lot of this will tie into doctrine later, but for now it's good enough to know that as the Navy changed size, it also changed composition, and various corporations began researching and creating new designs for starfighters and for capital ships. Pretty soon after the Empire became the Empire, the TIE fighter became their mainline fighter, but always new designs were being worked on, and one of these included the X-Wing made by Incom, the corporation which had previously made fighters like the ARC 170. However, as the Essential Guide to Warfare explains, the X-Wing was still a top secret project within the Incom Skunk Works when Incom scientists received word that the Empire planned to nationalize the company. Key members of the design team defected, escaping with the plans and prototypes and wiping Incom's computer networks clean before they made their getaway. While the Empire struggled to reconstruct Incom's corporate records, rebel raids emptied its facilities of virtually its entire stock of T-65s. So to summarize, Incom was designing a fighter which practically would have been used almost exclusively, at least in its military configuration, by the Empire, but because the Empire looked to take over their corporation, they basically fled with the plans, and later the fighters were secured by the Alliance. Now, it's possible that given enough time, the Empire could have basically redesigned the X-Wing, given the amount that would be eventually shot down and recovered. However, the X-Wing was arguably the most advanced fighter of the time, given all its internal systems, and to be honest, the Empire was fighting a war, so I doubt they had a whole bunch of resources they wanted to dedicate trying to reverse engineer a fighter when they could just design their own. The plans for the X-Wing 2 were kept top secret within the Alliance and within some friendly shipbuilding allies like the Mon Calamari, and funny enough, this is not the only time that an X-Wing project and the specifications of an X-Wing would be kept top secret. The Jedi Stealth X, from like 40 years later, would be another good example. But speaking of timeline, you also have to remember that the X-Wing didn't enter service until a couple of years before the Battle of Yavin, whereas the TIE fighter would have been established for the better part of a decade and a half by that point. So these are some really solid mechanical issues why the Empire didn't use the X-Wing, but they had enough money that they could have really bypassed any sort of problem with technology given enough time, had there been the political will, or the Palpatinian will. From a policy and doctrinal perspective, there's a lot of reasons why the Empire wouldn't want to use the X-Wing. First of all, the X-Wing was a symbol of rebellion. Now, this may be obvious, but I think some people really underestimate just how important the X-Wing was to the rebel cause. The entire Alliance military strategy for several years was built around the idea of hitting targets through guerrilla guerrilla warfare, getting in there with hyperdrive capable fighters, in this case the X-Wing, inflicting massive damage with these multi-role superlative fighters, then running away. So the Empire relied heavily on imaging, and we see them do things like removing customization from clone troopers in order to make stormtroopers seem like a faceless, unending army. All of their ships and weapons were designed to evoke terror in the Empire's citizens, and starfighters were a part of that, and many Imperials liked the sound that a TIE fighter made when doing a low pass over some poor village, for example. So bringing an X-Wing into the mix here just confuses things. Again, this is a symbol of rebellion, it has the capacity to inspire hope, and it's radically different than the rest of the fighters currently in Imperial service. Even just in appearance, I think that does matter. When it comes to scale too, the X-Wing was much more expensive than the TIE fighter. I don't really care about specific number amounts for things in Legends, because to be honest, they're not consistent, but I would say that an X-Wing is 2 or 3 times more expensive than a TIE fighter. The Empire was dictatorial and it heavily restricted people's rights, so it had a very large military and many fighters, so cost is a serious issue. Also, yeah, X-Wings are great, and I would take an X-Wing over a TIE fighter 9 times out of 10, but is the extra performance increases worth the cost? And if you just look at the X-Wing, there are several systems that are really important to the X-Wing which wouldn't be for Imperial ships. The Empire generally launched their fighters out of carriers, they were almost always detached to capital ships, they didn't really rely on hit and run tactics, which the X-Wing was so good at. So the X-Wing's very expensive and very advanced telemetry and sensor systems alongside its hyperdrive probably would not be necessary. It is true that the Empire needed something to counter these, and I think that's why the TIE Interceptor started to see a more broad rollout as the strength of the rebellion increased. And in fact, that was the purpose of the TIE Interceptor, to curb the X-Wing. So basically the Empire made their own version, which kept it within the TIE series, and which cut back on some of the expenses like the astro navigation and the telemetry systems and hyperdrive, things like that. And the TIE Interceptor, in my opinion, is actually a pretty underrated starfighter. Like the basic TIE, the Interceptor was more maneuverable than an X-Wing. It was faster than the basic series TIE and the X-Wing as well, and it had a total of 6 extra laser cannons. And on that note, not having missiles, which the X-Wing does, also helps with logistics and with cost, because practically interceptors wouldn't very frequently be targeting capital ships, unlike X-Wings, although proton torpedoes and other ordnance is still useful against starfighters in battle, as anyone who's read the Rogue Squadron books probably knows. So by inventing the Interceptor, the Empire didn't have to try to reverse engineer rebel technology, they didn't have to use a symbol that was closely associated with the rebellion, and they got to just add a new type of fighter to their TIE series, which was recognizable as an Imperial starfighter. And had the war gone on longer, I think TIE Interceptors would have made up over 50% of the Imperial Navy. The Essential Guide to Warfare says that by the Battle of Endor, it was at about 20%, and I think we would have seen other advanced TIE models like the Avenger and the Defender start to more commonly enter service, and those fighters certainly could stand up against the X-Wing as well. So that's why the X-Wing never really entered Imperial service, and in my opinion, it didn't really need to. It worked so well for the Rebel Alliance because its features suited their general doctrine, their stateless strategy, their hit and run attacks, getting in there, damaging a target before it can respond, then leaving. That's not how the Empire operated. Their main difficulty was just finding and keeping the Alliance in one place. Today's question is a very interesting one. It comes from Juan, who asks, does Coruscant have a senator, or are they basically represented by the Supreme Chancellor? And I had no idea before this, so I did some Googling. There was a good post on the Maw installation about that, and another one on one of the Jedi Council forums, and it seems like in Legends at least, Coruscant did not have a senator. As I was Googling it, I did find a Wikipedia page saying that they have one mentioned in canon, although I don't know the context. So, at least to my knowledge, not really. That's something I've never thought about before. Pretty interesting. Kind of like how Washington, D.C. works in the United States, for example, I would imagine. Anyway, guys, that's all for today. Thank you so much for watching this video. Hope you have a good one, and until next time, may the Force be with you.